They handed me the notice like it was already over. Like the land beneath my boots didn't belong to me anymore. 24 hours. That was all the HOA gave me to tear down the ranch. I had spent years building with my own hands. No hearing, no warning, just a smug clipboard smile and a deadline designed to crush me. Standing there in the dust, watching them drive away, I realized something important. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. The ranch wasn't some eyesore slapped together overnight. It was legal, permitted, inspected, and paid for down to the last nail. I had moved out here for peace, for quiet mornings and open land, not to fight clipboard tyrants who confused authority with ownership. Yet somehow, the HOA decided my fences were non-compliant. My barn was temporary, and my livelihood was disruptive. Every word in that notice was carefully chosen to sound final. I spent that night walking the property, listening to the animals settle, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with the HOA board. The threats, the fines, the sideways comments about how this area was changing. They thought I'd panic, bulldoze everything, and beg for mercy. That's how these things usually went. People folded, people sold, people disappeared. But the thing they didn't know was that before I built the ranch, before I ever put up a fence, I read every single line of the county development plan. I knew the zoning better than they did. I also knew something else they'd forgotten. The HOA didn't own the land. I did. Completely. Free and clear. By morning, the shock had burned off and turned into clarity. If they wanted a war of paperwork and leverage, I was done playing defense. I wasn't going to tear anything down. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to leave. Quietly. And I was going to let them think they'd won. Because sometimes the smartest move isn't fighting the order. It's stepping back, letting the enemy relax, and returning with power they never saw coming. As the sun rose over the ranch, I locked the gate, loaded my truck, and drove away. The HOA thought that was the end of me. It was actually the beginning of their worst mistake. For the next few weeks, I went completely silent. No emails, no appeals, no angry calls. From the HOA's point of view, I had folded exactly the way they expected. The ranch gates stayed locked, the driveway empty, and the rumors started spreading fast. People said I'd been forced out. Others said I couldn't afford the fines. One board member even bragged during a neighborhood meeting that order had been restored. Let every word float unchallenged. What they didn't realize was that silence gave me time. Time to plan. Time to read. Time to move pieces into place without anyone watching. I wasn't sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I was meeting with attorneys, county officials, and property assessors who were far more interested in facts than feelings. Every document told the same story. My ranch was legal. Their ultimatum wasn't. More importantly, I learned something buried deep in the HOA's own financial filings. Years ago, before I ever bought the land, the HOA had quietly sold off development rights to cover debts. Those rights didn't vanish. They transferred. And through a series of perfectly legal purchases made long before this conflict, they ended up in my hands. The board either didn't know or hoped no one would ever connect the dots. While the HOA strutted around claiming victory, they were still leasing land for parking, storage, and utility access. Land they no longer fully controlled. Land tied directly to the development rights they'd sold. The same land I now had leverage over. That realization changed everything. I watched from a distance as the neighborhood began expanding. New homes, new amenities, more reliance on shared access routes and facilities. Every improvement quietly increased the value of what I held. The HOA assumed stability. I saw dependency. And dependency, when paired with arrogance, creates opportunity. One afternoon, I drove past the ranch without stopping. The grass was high. The barn stood exactly where it always had. Nothing had been torn down. Nothing had changed. Except now, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was waiting. The board's biggest mistake wasn't issuing the ultimatum. It was believing that power only worked one way. They thought authority flowed from rules and fines. I understood something they didn't. Real power comes from control of resources people can't live without. Roads, access, permissions, money. And once you control those, you don't need to raise your voice at all. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need drama. I needed timing. And when the moment came, I planned to return, not as the man they ordered around, but as the one holding the keys. I returned on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary day where nobody expects their world to tilt. The HOA board was in the middle of approving landscaping, budgets, and patting themselves on the back for a quiet quarter. When I walked into the meeting room, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Faces tightened. Someone actually whispered my name like they'd seen a ghost. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I handed over documents. Clean copies. Highlighted sections. County stamps. Signed contracts. The kind of paperwork that doesn't need explaining. It speaks for itself. The room went silent as they realized I wasn't there to beg or complain. I was there to notify. The board president tried to smile it off, telling everyone this was old business, and that my ranch had already been dealt with. That confidence lasted about 30 seconds. That's how long it took for their attorney to start flipping pages faster than comfort allows. I watched the color drain from his face as he found the clause they'd forgotten. The one tying their leased facilities, access roads, and utility easements directly to the development rights they no longer owned. I explained it calmly. Years ago, the HOA sold those rights to survive a financial crisis. I later purchased them legally through intermediaries. That gave me authority over continued use, authority they were now abusing. Their ultimatum, their fines, their threats, all of it violated the conditions required to keep those agreements valid. The room erupted. Board members argued with each other, accused one another of hiding information, demanded explanations that came too late. The same people who once spoke down to me were suddenly asking for time and flexibility. I declined both. I informed them that effective immediately, all leases tied to my development rights were being renegotiated. No more grandfathered rates, no more favors. Market value, updated monthly, fully enforceable. They laughed at first, until I slid the numbers across the table. 10 times what they'd been paying. That laughter died fast. They threatened lawsuits. I welcomed them. They threatened delays. I pointed out penalties. They threatened public backlash. I reminded them that I'd followed every rule they'd claimed to protect, perfectly, legally, thoroughly. For the first time, they understood the position they'd put me in months ago. Except now I was the one with the deadline, and unlike theirs, mine wasn't negotiable. I stood up, wished them a productive meeting, and walked out. Behind me, the sound wasn't anger. It was panic. Real panic. The kind that comes when people realize power has changed hands and there's nothing they can do to stop it. The first invoices went out at the start of the next month. Clean, itemized, professionally drafted. No insults, no commentary. Just numbers and due dates. That's when reality finally hit the neighborhood. The HOA's operating budget had been built around old, comfortable rates they'd enjoyed for years. Rates they assumed were permanent. Overnight, those assumptions collapsed. Emergency meetings followed. Residents packed into rooms that suddenly felt too small. Board members tried to explain the situation without admitting fault, using phrases like unexpected, changes, and external pressures. But homeowners weren't stupid. They saw the line items, they saw the rent increases, and they saw who had signed the orders that started this chain reaction. Panic spread fast. Special assessments were proposed. Dues were raised. People who had applauded the ranch ultimatum months earlier were now furious that their own bills were exploding. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact with me were suddenly asking questions. Quiet questions. Careful ones. They wanted to know if this could be reversed. The board came back to me with a proposal. A compromise, they called it. They'd rescind the demolition order, drop the fines, publicly acknowledge the ranch was compliant. In exchange, they wanted the old rates back. They spoke slowly, carefully, like people negotiating with something fragile. I listened. Then I reminded them that compliance had never been the issue. Respect was. They hadn't asked. They'd commanded. They'd tried to erase my work with a deadline and a threat. The ranch order could be undone, sure. But leverage, once lost, doesn't magically return. What surprised them most wasn't my refusal. It was how reasonable I was about it. I offered reduced rates, still higher than before, still painful, but survivable. In return, the HOA would sign binding agreements limiting their authority over privately owned agricultural land. No more vague enforcement. No more weaponized bylaws. Everything spelled out. Everything transparent. The board hesitated. The residents didn't. Pressure came down hard. Lawsuits were threatened, not against me, but against the HOA leadership. Suddenly, the people who once enjoyed flexing power were scrambling to protect themselves. Within weeks, the agreement was signed. New board elections were scheduled. Resignations followed. The ranch demolition order was officially withdrawn, replaced with a written apology buried deep in meeting minutes. Most people would never read. I drove back out to the ranch as the dust settled. The fences were still standing. The barn still solid. The land unchanged. What had changed was the balance. The HOA had learned, painfully, that authority only works when it's backed by legitimacy. As I reopened the gates, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you didn't just win a fight. You ended it. Life at the ranch didn't return to normal overnight. It settled into something better, quieter, more intentional. The animals adjusted first, then the routines, then finally the neighbors. People drove slower past the gate now. They waved. Some even stopped to talk, careful at first, then more relaxed. The fear had drained out of the place, replaced by an understanding that power wasn't something you could bully into submission. The new HOA board kept its distance. When they did reach out, it was formal, documented, and respectful. No more surprise inspections. No more threatening letters. Every interaction followed the agreements to the letter. The bylaws that once felt like weapons were now just rules again, stripped of ego and misuse. What stayed with me most wasn't the victory, but how close I came to losing everything simply because I assumed fairness was automatic. It isn't. Systems don't protect you by default. You protect yourself by understanding them better than the people who think they control you. The HOA had relied on intimidation and speed. 24 hours. No time to think. No room to respond. That tactic only works when the target panics. I didn't panic. I stepped back. I learned. I waited. Raising the rent tenfold wasn't about punishment. It was about correction. About forcing accountability into a structure that had forgotten what it was for. The moment the bills came due, the illusion of authority shattered. Everyone suddenly cared about process, legality, and consequences. Funny how that works. Sometimes people ask if I'd do it all again. If the stress was worth it, I tell them the truth. I wouldn't choose the fight, but I'd choose the response every time. Walking away temporarily saved me. Coming back prepared changed everything. The ranch still stands because I stood my ground in a smarter way. Not with shouting. Not with threats. With patience, paperwork, and leverage. The kind of tools no one fears until it's too late. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's simple. Never assume someone else's authority outranks your ownership. Never let urgency steal your clarity. And never underestimate how dangerous a calm, quiet person can be once they understand the rules better than you do. As the sun sets over the fields now, the land feels earned. Not just owned, earned. And every time the wind moves through the fence lines, it reminds me of the same truth the HOA learned the hard way. You can order someone to tear things down, but you can't order them to surrender.